Section 1.3, graphs of a function. We're going to start with this example. I'm going to use the graph of the function shown below to find the domain, the function values f of -1, f of 2, and the range of f. This is a review, that's why I'm covering this example in a video instead of during class. So you just need to remember that the domain is the x values, all the possible x values of the function. F of -1 is just saying, if you go to x equals -1, what's the y value? And that's what f of 2 is asking. And you need to remember that range is all the possible y values. So as we look at this, it's important to notice that this function doesn't keep going down here at this lowest point. There's not an arrow that keeps going at the end. And on the other end of the function, there's not an arrow that keeps going. And it's important to notice that we reach a max and then it stops. So we read a function from left to right. So from left to right, we would start here. We would rise, hit that max point, and then we would decrease. So if I want the function values for the domain, the x values, I want to say what is the smallest x value and what's the largest x value. So I'm going to go smallest to largest. Same for the range. So as I start here from left to right, I don't get x values and I don't get x values until I hit this point right here. Right here. That's my first x value. So I've got a -1. And then I keep going. I have x values until I hit right here. X equals 4. Now we're going to talk just a little bit about interval notation, and I'll be talking a lot more about it in days to come. Since this point right here is a solid dot, we use a bracket. And since this point right here is an open circle, we use a parenthesis. And it's kind of like if you picture these on a number line, and you have from -1 to 4, and you have a closed circle and an open circle. The bracket and the parenthesis are directly related to this. So for the bracket, you kind of want to imagine the -1 is included, so that's what the bracket means. And you can kind of see the bracket coming right down through the -1, and then all these numbers are included, and then we get super close to the 4, but we don't reach it. So that's what the parenthesis is symbolizing. Now, if we want to know the f of -1, you go to -1 on the x, find the function, and it's right here. And at -1, the y value is -5. And for f of 2, x is 2, what's y? That's what that's asking. You would go to 2 on the x, find the function, and f of 2 is 4. So you find the function, and then you would, like, if they didn't give us the ordered pair, you would go over and see what the y value was. What if I had asked for f of 0? Well, you'd go to where x equals 0. You'd find the function. Well, it's right, it goes right through there. It has an intercept there. And what's the y value? It's 0. So f of 0 is 0. Now, range values are the y values. And just like when we did domain, we wanted to go from smallest to largest. We want to do that again. So the range, we want to go smallest to largest. So we'll start at the bottom and we'll go up. So as we starting at the bottom of the graph, we would start right here. And that's our first range value. Range is y, so that's a -5. Whoops. And we have y values all the way. We have y values up till here, and that's our last y value. So the largest it gets is a 4. And then you're going to look at the open circle and closed circles. And both of these are closed circles, so they get parentheses. Brackets, not parentheses. So those numbers get included in the range. Okay, next we're going to talk about this idea of increasing and decreasing functions. And we'll be writing out intervals where the function's increasing and decreasing. If you can just keep in mind that we read a graph from left to right, then that's going to make this part so much easier. So as you look at this function right here, let me just do its domain real quickly, just so we can practice that. The domain, the smallest x value from left to right is -2. And so I've got a -2, and then that's as far as we go, and that's an x value of 4. So my domain is -2 to 4. And at -2 and at 4, we have closed circles, so we will use brackets. Range, smallest to largest, no values until we hit right here at 1. Range uses y values. Range is the only thing that really uses y values very much. And then we go all the way up to here, and that's our top y value. And even, there are. I was going to say even though there's not closed circles, but there's a closed circle here at the bottom and a closed circle at the top, so we get to use brackets. We'll get more practice with that in upcoming days. So if we read a graph from left to right, we start at the most left point and we travel along the curve from left to right. Whoops. So starting at this leftmost point, we're going down the graph until we hit right here. So it's decreasing. We use x values for increasing and decreasing. And we use parentheses. We don't have to worry about brackets. So I want to state the interval where it's increasing and decreasing. So at the beginning we are decreasing we use x values, so from here to here. So we're decreasing from -2 to 0. And we always use parentheses. And then as we traveled, we were decreasing, and then we hit this mark, and we're straight flat for a little bit. So we're constant. So we're constant from 0 to 2 using x values. And then at this point, at 2, the function begins increasing again. So then we're, not again, but increasing. So we're increasing from 2 to 4 using x values. This is the more formal mathematical definition. A function f is increasing on an interval when for any x1 and x2. So this would be my x1 and this would be my x2. x1 is less than x2, so I labeled them from left to right, and 2 is less than 4. That implies f of x1, which means the y value here. So the y value for x1 is less than the y value for x2. And that's true. The y value 1 is less than the y value 4. So it's a more mature definition, and we're going to see lots of more mature definitions. So I would just challenge you to go ahead and try to make sense of reading that one and the constant definition. Okay, just going on again, these are terms that you know and you've heard of. We have a function value f of a is called a relative minimum of f when there exists in the interval x1 to x2 that contains a such that x1 is less than x is less than x2 implies f of a is less than or equal to f of x. What in the world are they talking about? So all they're talking about is, so let's discuss this relative min right here. So it's got a x1 here and an x2 here. And this is the x value that goes with that relative min. So it's just saying that its x value is in between those, where this one is the smallest, this one's the next increasing x value, and this is the biggest x value in that range. And so that implies that this function values f of a is less than or equal to f of x. So all that means is that this y value for the relative minimum, this y value is the lowest point on this little part of the curve. So it's kind of complicated sounding, but we've known what relative mins and relative maxes were for years. So this graph has two relative mins and it has two relative maximums. Max highest points, mins lowest points.